Before we dive into the story, take a close look at this tiny white flower. At first glance, it doesn't seem like much. It's embroidered onto a simple white Nike hair tie so small that television cameras could barely capture it. No giant logo, no flashy design, just 5 delicate white petals stitched onto an accessory most people would never notice. Yet that tiny flower sparked thousands of conversations across the tennis world. Why? Because for millions of Filipinos watching from around the globe, it wasn't just a flower. It was recognition. It was identity. It was history stitched into fabric. When Nike handed this gift to Alexandra Eala before Wimbledon, they weren't simply giving one of their athletes another piece of branded merchandise. They were acknowledging an entire nation, one that has waited decades to see one of its own walk onto tennis's most famous court. Sometimes the biggest stories don't begin with championship trophies. Sometimes they begin with something small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. And that's exactly what happened here. The remarkable journey of this tiny Sampaguita flower isn't really about fashion, sponsorships, or marketing campaigns. It's about how one simple symbol became a source of pride for millions of people who suddenly saw themselves represented on one of sport's biggest stages. But to understand why this gift mattered so much, we first need to understand Alexandra Eala's moment in history. For years, Filipino tennis fans dreamed about seeing one of their own compete on Wimbledon's legendary grass courts. The dream always felt distant. Tennis wasn't the country's biggest sport, and reaching the highest level required resources, opportunities, and experience that were difficult to find. Then Alexandra Eala changed everything. She climbed through the junior ranks, earned victories against increasingly stronger opponents, and slowly built a reputation as one of the brightest young talents in women's tennis. Every tournament became another step toward proving that Filipino athletes belonged on tennis's biggest stages. By the summer of 2025, that dream had finally become reality. Eala walked through the gates of Wimbledon as the first Filipina ever to compete in the singles main draw at the historic tournament. That achievement alone guaranteed her place in Philippine sporting history. But something else happened before she even struck her first tennis ball. As she prepared to walk onto center court, Nike presented her with a special gift. At first, even Eala didn't realize how meaningful it would become. The gift wasn't expensive jewelry. It wasn't a luxury watch. It wasn't a custom racket or a pair of exclusive shoes. Instead, Nike handed her a simple white hair tie decorated with the Sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines. The design was almost unbelievably subtle. Unless someone pointed it out, most viewers watching on television would never have noticed it. And perhaps that's exactly what made it so powerful. Rather than demanding attention, the flower quietly carried its message. It wasn't trying to dominate the spotlight. It simply belonged there. Along with the hair tie came a handwritten note that immediately caught Eala's attention. Instead of writing the message entirely in English, Nike chose to include Tagalog, a language deeply connected to Filipino identity and culture. One particular proverb stood out. What you plant today, you will one day harvest. Simple, timeless, yet incredibly meaningful. The message reflected years of sacrifice, countless hours on the practice court, and every challenge Eala had overcome to reach Wimbledon. Dreams don't appear overnight. They grow. They require patience. They require belief. Most importantly, they require years of unseen work before anyone notices the results. For Alexandra Eala, Wimbledon represented that harvest. Years of determination had finally brought her to one of the most prestigious courts in all of sports. But Nike's message went even deeper. The note described her as a Filipina carrying an entire nation into full bloom. That sentence transformed the gift from a thoughtful gesture into something much larger. Suddenly, the hair tie wasn't simply an accessory. It became a symbol. Some people might dismiss this as clever marketing. And to be fair, Nike is a global company. Every campaign passes through meetings, creative teams, branding strategies, and business decisions. There's absolutely no denying that. Companies create products to build stronger relationships with consumers. That's how business works. but acknowledging that reality doesn't automatically erase genuine emotion. Sometimes a commercial idea can also become deeply personal. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. The real question isn't whether Nike hoped people would notice. Of course they did. The more interesting question is whether the people receiving the message genuinely felt represented. Judging by the reaction across the Philippines and among Filipino communities worldwide, the answer was unmistakable. They did. Because the Sampaguita isn't just another flower. Long before it appeared on a Nike accessory, it had carried generations of meaning throughout Filipino culture. Officially recognized as the national flower of the Philippines, the Sampaguita has symbolized purity, loyalty, humility, and unwavering devotion for decades. Its very name is believed to come from the phrase meaning, "I promise you." That's a powerful meaning. Throughout the Philippines, Sampaguita flowers appear during weddings, graduations, religious ceremonies, and countless important moments in people's lives. Children grow up recognizing it. Families associate it with celebration, commitment, and hope. So when Alexandra Eala stepped onto center court wearing that flower, many Filipinos didn't simply see a beautiful design. They saw home. They saw family. They saw tradition. Most importantly, they saw someone proudly carrying a piece of their culture onto one of the world's biggest sporting stages without saying a single word. That quiet confidence made the moment unforgettable. No speech was necessary. No dramatic announcement was required. 5 embroidered petals said everything. And while millions of viewers focused on serves, forehands, and scoreboards, another story had quietly begun unfolding. It was a story that would eventually grow far beyond one hair tie, one tournament, or even one athlete. Because what started as the smallest gift Nike could possibly give Alexandra Eala was about to become something much bigger. The true power of Nike's gift wasn't revealed on center court. It unfolded over the months that followed. At first, the Sampaguita was simply a thoughtful surprise prepared for Alexandra Eala before her Wimbledon debut. But what nobody could have predicted was how quickly that tiny white flower would grow into something much larger than a personal keepsake. The story was no longer just about one athlete. It had become a story shared by millions. For many international fans, the flower was simply an elegant design that matched Wimbledon's famous all-white tradition. For Filipinos, however, every detail carried meaning. The white petals weren't chosen because they looked attractive. They represented a national symbol that generations had grown up recognizing. Unlike bold national flags or colorful uniforms, the Sampaguita blended perfectly into Wimbledon's strict dress code while quietly telling everyone exactly where Alexandra Eala came from. That subtlety made the gesture even more remarkable. Without breaking tradition, Eala had brought a piece of the Philippines onto one of tennis's most prestigious stages. And people noticed. Photos of the hair tie quickly spread across social media. Sports websites began highlighting the story behind the embroidered flower. Filipino fans proudly shared images with friends and family, explaining why such a tiny detail meant so much. Many weren't celebrating a trophy. They were celebrating representation. For decades, Filipino sports fans often watched international tennis feeling like outsiders. They admired the world's biggest stars, but rarely saw athletes carrying symbols that reflected their own culture. Now, for perhaps the first time on Wimbledon's center court, they saw something unmistakably Filipino. Not through loud celebrations, not through dramatic speeches, but through 5 simple white petals. Alexandra Eala later described the gift as a reminder of where she came from and everything that helped her reach this moment. Those words perfectly captured why the gesture resonated so deeply. No matter how far an athlete travels, no matter how many countries they compete in, home remains part of who they are. For Eala, that connection wasn't hidden beneath her uniform. It was stitched directly into it. As the months passed, Nike realized that the idea had become much more than a one-time Wimbledon surprise. Instead of leaving the Sampaguita behind, they decided to build upon it. By early 2026, the flower had become part of a much larger celebration of Alexandra Eala's remarkable rise. When she visited Nike's global headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon, she wasn't greeted with an ordinary athlete presentation. Instead, she stepped into an environment that reflected the same visual identity first introduced through that tiny hair tie. Large floral displays inspired by the Sampaguita welcomed her throughout the campus. Custom artwork celebrated both her achievements and her Filipino heritage. One of the biggest surprises came in the form of a specially designed pair of Nike shoes created exclusively for her. The shoes featured elegant Sampaguita-inspired artwork woven into the design. There were also visual references to her breakthrough achievements on the professional tour, along with subtle Philippine elements that honored the journey she had taken to reach the sport's highest level. What had once been a flower stitched onto a hair tie had now evolved into an entire creative collection. It was no longer just an accessory. It had become part of Alexandra Eala's identity as a global Nike athlete. But perhaps the most meaningful development didn't happen inside Nike headquarters. It happened thousands of miles away in the Philippines. Soon afterward, Nike introduced apparel carrying the same full-bloom design language inspired by the Sampaguita. For the first time, fans could wear the same symbol that Alexandra Eala had carried onto center court. That changed everything. Until then, the flower had belonged only to Eala. Now it belonged to everyone. Young tennis players began wearing the design during practice. Supporters proudly posted photos online. Families purchased the shirts as a symbol of national pride rather than simply another piece of sports merchandise. The relationship between athlete and supporters became stronger. Instead of merely cheering from the stands, fans felt connected to the story itself. They were wearing the same symbol, sharing the same message, celebrating the same dream. Of course, it's important to recognize both sides of this story. Nike is one of the world's largest sports companies. Every campaign is carefully planned. Every design serves a business purpose. Creating products inspired by Alexandra Eala also strengthened Nike's connection with millions of Filipino consumers around the world. There's nothing surprising about that. Successful companies understand the importance of meaningful storytelling. But acknowledging the business side doesn't erase the emotional impact. Sometimes a marketing campaign succeeds precisely because it connects with something authentic. The Sampaguita wasn't invented by Nike. Its meaning had existed for generations before any sponsorship agreement. Nike simply chose to respect that history instead of replacing it. That distinction matters. Instead of creating an artificial symbol, they elevated one that already carried deep cultural significance. And that's why so many people embraced it. Still, with every new symbol comes greater responsibility. As Alexandra Eala's popularity continued growing, expectations also grew heavier. Every tournament suddenly felt larger than tennis. She wasn't only competing for ranking points anymore. Millions of supporters now saw her as a representative of an entire generation of Filipino athletes. That's an incredible honor. But it's also an enormous burden. Imagine stepping onto court knowing that every victory inspires millions. Now imagine knowing every defeat disappoints those same supporters. That kind of pressure isn't visible on television. It doesn't appear on the scoreboard. Yet athletes carry it every time they compete. The Sampaguita had become more than decoration. It represented hope. And hope can be surprisingly heavy. That challenge would soon be tested in one of the toughest moments of Alexandra Eala's young career. Because symbols are easy to celebrate when everything is going perfectly. The real question is what happens when victory slips away. Would the flower still carry the same meaning after heartbreak? That answer would arrive on the grass courts of Eastbourne. And it would reveal that the true strength of a symbol isn't measured during moments of triumph, but during moments of resilience. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to the channel ****. It really helps us bring you more inspiring tennis stories every week. Now let's get back to Alexandra Eala's incredible journey. What started as a simple white hair tie was quickly becoming something much bigger. After her unforgettable Wimbledon debut, Nike expanded the Sampaguita theme beyond a single accessory. During Alexandra's visit to Nike's global headquarters, she was welcomed with custom displays celebrating her Filipino heritage, along with exclusive shoes inspired by the Sampaguita flower. Soon Nike also released Full Bloom apparel, allowing fans in the Philippines to wear the same symbol that Alexandra proudly carried onto center court. It was no longer just a gift for one athlete. It had become a symbol of pride shared by millions of Filipinos around the world. But as the flower's meaning grew, so did the expectations resting on Alexandra's shoulders. Every match now represented more than just tennis, setting the stage for one of the biggest challenges of her young career.